Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to SEEE's webinar today on measuring your impact. And we're very pleased to have Nicky Stevenson with us, who is part of SEEE. And she's also the co-creator of the social impact measurement toolbox that SEEE offer. So she'll be talking about impact generally and also the toolbox. Just a note for me that if you're not a member of Social Enterprises of England, please consider it. We offer a joint membership with Social Enterprise UK. And also if your turnover is under 100,000, it's free to join. So it's a bit of a no-brainer really, certainly for small organisations. And it means you can access lots of different resources and first hear about these types of events, that type of thing. So yes, I'm recording this webinar, and afterwards we'll also be able to send around any slides that Nicky has. And just a plug finally to say we've got some other webinars happening this week, which might be of interest to you. I'm delivering a marketing one this afternoon at 2 o'clock, which is content marketing for social enterprises. And later this week, we've got a business planning workshop tomorrow. And we've also got a finding funding masterclass on Friday. So by all means, have a look on our website if you'd like to join one of those. So if you could all make sure you're mute while Nicky's talking, and there will be opportunities at other points to ask questions. And I will now hand over to you, Nicky.
Hi, hello everybody, good morning. Sorry, I've got the sun moving round in front of the window. I'm not complaining, it's lovely to see the sun, but I've just been trying to get it so I'm something other than a white blur on the screen. But anyway, that won't make much difference when you're looking at my at the presentation. So what I'm proposing to do this morning is to just do a quick introduction to social impact measurement. We started off by just talking about the toolbox, but then we found that people wanted more actual content as well. So I've got just a very brief kind of what social impact measurement is about, why we need to do it, and what some of the key issues are for me. And then I'm going to take you through our social impact measurement toolbox, and then hopefully we'll have time to have a bit of a discussion at the end. Well, we will have time to have a bit of a discussion at the end. So if you've got any comments or questions as I go through the presentation, then please note them in the chat, and then we'll pick them up when we come back to being all on the screen afterwards. And then just sort of let us know that you want to, you've got a question in the usual way, either by waving vigorously or using the hands up signal, and either Jane or I will pick you up. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now and try and go to my slides, which I can't find. Too much stuff open. Sorry, I'm just going to open that first. That might help. No, yeah. Right, can everybody see my screen? Yep, great, okay. Right, okay, so measuring, making an impact. Well, what does it all mean? We hear this, there's a word cloud here, there's this kind of gentle buzz of words that we hear around this agenda about why we're doing it, about about outcomes and inputs and indicators and evidence and particular approaches like distance travelled or cost benefit or social accounting or social return on investment. And so what I really want to do is sort of unpick some of this buzz to come out with some sort of quite clear and straightforward interpretations of some of this, and to think about how that translates into the practice of what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis. Why are we doing this at all? Why does it matter? And I think increasingly we are in an environment where funders, individual customers, other stakeholders, other people involved in the kind of socially valuable work that a lot of us are doing, are saying, well, how do we know that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing? If we are claiming to provide social value in our organisation, how do we prove it to people? It's not enough any longer, I think, to say, we're a social enterprise, we're a charity, we do good things, and people will want to know what good things, how many of them do you do, and what evidence have you got that you're doing what you say you're doing. So it's more and more important in this climate to have that evidence. Who decides what gets valued and what gets measured? Over so many years, I've heard individual organisations say, oh, well, we only measure what our funders ask us to do, but that doesn't tell the whole picture of what we provide. And you say, well, do you collect the evidence of all those other things you do? And people say no, because nobody asked us to do it. And again, I think, and I always say that impact measurement is about putting you in control of your own narrative. If you have a story to tell, then it's up to you to collect the evidence to demonstrate to people that this is what you're achieving, this is what your organisation does, and this is how people are supported, and this is what the outcomes are for individual people. And I think there's more and more pressure on organisations to do it. A lot of large social enterprises already do this. I know some of you here, I know your organisations, and I know some of you are doing some of this stuff already, and quite a lot of it. And some commercial businesses are doing it. So we hear about, you know, a sort of social washing of big corporates, and they're coming out with really fantastic data about their corporate social responsibility. Leaves out completely any damage they might be doing in their other work, but they tell a good story. They have the money to invest in telling a good story. And it's really, really important that those organisations who are genuinely doing good are able to tell their story too. And as I said, people who buy from us increasingly want to know what impact their money is buying. Somebody I know got a bursary to go and do some research in the States a few years ago, and she met some of the really innovative and far-sighted trust funds over there. And somebody said to her in the course of one of her interviews, in a few years' time, we won't be asking what people did with their money. We won't be asking to see a budget and looking to see how they spent it. All we will want to know is what outcomes, what impact they created. So I think a lot of funding is moving in that direction, and we have to be ahead of that curve. So how do we deal with it then? Because there's, I mean, several of you have said in the comments in your application, there's a lot of tools around. You want to find a pathway through. And now, and there are a lot of tools around, and there are different tools that measure different things for different reasons. And this is a sort of map a bit of showing how some of them work. So we have individual outcomes tools, things that measure what changes for an individual, what happens with an individual who we support. Was life made better for them? Did they get to where they needed to get to? And we call that an outcomes tool. And there are different versions of those. And people have talked about distance travelled. How much has somebody changed as they've gone through, as they've received our support? Then we have quality systems, which look at both the innate quality of what you do. If you do anything with children, anything around education and learning, you will be assessed by Ofsted. That is your quality system. That says we are basically fit to deliver this service. And that's about the organisation as a whole. We also look at pulling together the individual outcome tools to say, well, if this happened to one person, what happens when we aggregate that data for all the people we've supported? And we have a record of that which we keep, and that says this is what our project achieves rather than this is what happened for one individual. And then in the third column we have at the top money. What was the financial impact of what we achieved, the economic impact? We've got a tree representing environmental impact and a group of people representing social impact. So is there a wider impact of the work we do in the world around us? And then finally, a social impact measurement framework, which will collect all of that together and tell your story in a coherent way, looking at all the different things that you do. And an example of this, years ago when I wrote my master's dissertation, I did it, my subject was, does volunteering enhance employability? And I spoke to about 6 voluntary organisations that used a lot of volunteers, and I interviewed a lot of volunteers. And all but one of those organisations said if volunteers often got a job as a result of their volunteering experience, A, it was a damn nuisance because they had to find more volunteers, and B, it wasn't anything they captured. So they weren't able to tell anybody about all these fantastic jobs that people were going into as a result of their volunteering. So it's an important part of what you do, and it's important to tell the whole picture, not just a part of it. So just some brief examples of those. So if we start with our outcome for an individual, we start with Jenny, and Jenny is tending, shall we say, a community gardening project. So she's been going for 6 months, and if we're running that project, what we want to say is, okay, Jenny has been coming for the sessions that she's attended. We can say that Jenny has attended twice a week for 6 months. She's done 2 training courses, and she has volunteered to help us out at one of our events. So that's what she's done. We can count that, but that's the data that we can collect in a regular monitoring process. But then we want to say, well, what has Jenny achieved? Well, Jenny has helped plant 2 new vegetable beds. Jenny has supported other volunteers as they've come in, and Jenny has helped us to display our materials at an exhibition. So these are the things that Jenny has done. And then, so what has changed for Jenny? Well, Jenny has become more confident. She's learned new skills. She has discovered that she likes working with people. She has decided that she's going to manage her own garden better in future. And she has, yeah, you could go on. You could go and think maybe health benefits. You could say Jenny's health has improved because of the exercise she's been getting in the garden. You might even say that Jenny has said that her doctor has recorded her blood pressure has reduced. So there are all those changes that could have happened for Jenny. And then we might think, well, what next? What's she going to go on and do next? And it could be that she goes on a course. It could be that she gets a job in a garden. It could be that she volunteers in an organisation to support other gardeners. And there are lots of things that you could say, well, these are the long-term things that happen for Jenny as a result of the work of our work. So this has all happened for Jenny. And we really want to know that, because we really want to know that we're having a positive impact on every individual who comes to our organisation. But then we want to aggregate all of that. So we can say at that time, 20 people were attending the garden. And over that 6-month period, 18 of them attended all the sessions, 15 of them gained confidence and learned a new skill, and 12 of them went on to college and obtained a qualification. So those are the kinds of things that you can pull together by aggregating the information. We usually know on a one-to-one basis what's happened to Jenny, but what we often do is don't pull all that together into a coherent report that we can present to other people. And in terms of the evidence we collect, we want to know what changed and what was the extent of the change. And I think this is absolutely crucial when you're measuring impact. You want to identify and define what the change is, and count it. So you can tell a fantastic one-off case story about what happened for one person, but if that's not relevant to anybody else who came to the project, then the extent of the change is quite limited. So what changed? People tell you their stories and they describe to them what has changed, and that is the best way of finding out what has changed. It may be things you intended were going to happen, but it could also be things that you didn't intend to happen but turn out to be really important for the beneficiary. So Jenny might say, well, actually, I sleep so much better. I get out in the fresh air, I sleep much better. It makes me better able to deal with my children because they can be a bit rowdy in the morning, and previously I get a bit ratty, but I'm sleeping so much better and it really helps. That might not be on your radar at all, as neither was getting your volunteers getting a job, but it's important for the people. So they need to tell you that those changes are happening and you need to be asking them. And then we can start to quantify that. So 15 people told us they'd improved their relationships as a result of this work. Well, we didn't intend that to happen. We didn't know about that. We thought that they would gain confidence. And yes, everybody has said that they've gained confidence. And we thought that people would feel healthier, but the sleeping better and the improved relationships, that's a bit of a surprise. So now we've identified more about what has changed and whether that's a one-off change for one person, or whether we can calculate it and it becomes a relevant change for other people too. When we're doing this sort of work, there are a lot of misunderstandings. A lot of people are quite sceptical about social impact measurement, partly because there's been some slightly dodgy practice going on in the past. I'll come back to that. But we must be clear, this is social research. Anybody, if you do anything in health, they're all scientists. So they will say, what's your methodology? Have you got a randomized control group to prove that this is the case? Well, no, of course you haven't, because you're not going to offer a service and then study like rats and mazes, a group of people who you haven't helped. We don't work like that. So no, that's not appropriate. It's social research. It depends on interviews and talking to people and asking about people's feelings and experiences and validating those. There will always be subjective interpretations. So it's important to recognize that. It's not hard empirical data that you can test and retest and do sums on. And it's about what you as a project have done with the work that you're doing. And you just need to hold your hand up and say, yes, this is what it is, and not pretend that it's something else. Another common misunderstanding is that benefits of saving costs for public authorities, for funders, are not the same as social benefits. It doesn't matter to Jenny if her improved health is saving her GP money, because he has to see her or she has to see her less times and they have to prescribe less. And there are, for Jenny, it's about, this is how I feel, this is how it's improved my quality of life. And that is brilliant in and of itself and can be quantified and measured. But it's not the same as saving the costs of the GP or the council or anybody else, which you can also quantify and measure, as long as you do it carefully. It's important to be clear what the story is. There is a difference between one-off interventions that create a permanent change and ongoing needs, and it's important to be clear which of those things your organisation is trying to do. I once did a social return on investment assessment in a charity that was providing a befriending service and activity day centres, a sort of friendship club for adults with learning disabilities. And the attitude to the council when we presented the report was, well, when is this funding, when are people going to stop needing this service? Well, the answer is never. They have a learning disability. They are never going to be fully independent of social services. Most of them, I mean, some of them are quite profoundly disabled and will always be a high priority and need that service. Some of them did show changes in their lives that made them able to be a bit more independent. But this is a service that is always going to be needed. And that is different between doing something, for example, which helps people get a job, or again, an example I often use is helping people cope with substance abuse. If you are helping people to stop abusing drugs or alcohol, you intend that your intervention is going to have long-term or permanent impact on most of the people who engage. It won't work for everybody. People will fall off the wagon. We know they might take 2 or 3 goes before the permanent change happens. But the intention is this one-off intervention is going to lead to that lasting change, and then people won't need it in future. They're very different things, and be careful what the expectations are about the way you choose to measure and the way that you choose to tell your story. Don't try and let people off the hook by saying this doesn't need funding permanently if it does. Okay. And then I think it's important to say we don't measure social value. What we do is we measure the outcomes and we quantify those. In that little graph I showed you earlier, we can say how many people this happened for. And then we place a value on them, because value is subjective, and somebody can challenge the way we valued something, but what they can't challenge is that data that says this is how many people it happened to. And that's about quality of life. And that will be different for everybody, and it is totally subjective. And again, it's important to be transparent about that. And the example on the bottom right of the screen there is a house. You know, when we buy a house, we don't buy the aggregated value of bricks and window frames and drain pipes and doors and windows. What we buy is a value which is subjective, and it might depend on whether I can look out of my window and see some trees, if I'm near the park, if it's near a good school, if it's near the station, if it's got parking, if it's in a good neighbourhood, whatever that looks like. Those are the things that we value about the property, and that value is what we value affects the price of the property that we're buying. And this is the same sort of thing. It will be different, and some things might be valued more highly than others. So in terms of, because of all of that, because of all of this stuff swirling around, all this buzz, this is why we worked up the impact measurement toolbox. We decided to call it a toolbox because we didn't want it to be like a book that you have to read. We wanted it to be practical and to have tools that you can use in your day-to-day practice. And we called it a consultant in a box, because the idea is that there's a lot of consultancy support around. I do it. I know a lot of other people who do it. But if you're really small, you can't afford very often to get the help you need. But the idea is that the toolbox will give you the tools, the equipment and the knowledge to do this yourself. That's not totally free. Obviously, it needs time, it needs commitment, and you need to do certain things. But we build how you do that into the toolbox. So what I'm going to do now is stop sharing this and go into the toolbox. It has 6 sections, and you can see the buttons there. The first section is about collecting information and the basics of how you gather information, what kind of thing you need to be looking at, what is relevant to your group, and how you want to use it. What you really need to collect and what you don't need to collect, because sometimes we just collect all this stuff automatically. Do we need to know where they live? Well, we might, but equally we might not. So it's about asking yourself, what is it you really need to know? Then the next section is about looking about who to involve and who are the people who have a stake in your organisation. Whose information do you, what do you need to know when you're finding out if you have created impact? Section C is how to have conversations about change. One of the things that people often say to me when I go in and measure impact in organisations is, we've got fantastic feedback from our users. And I say, great, I see it. That's really what I want to know. And the feedback is, I really enjoy coming here. Mary's such a brilliant tutor and she really makes me feel positive, and I really like the lunches, and it's such a warm and welcoming place. Now, all of that is fantastic, and you really want to know that, but it doesn't tell you anything about what has changed. And in order to find out what has changed, you need to ask specific questions in a specific way, and this section will help you do that. Section D starts to think about how you're going to shape this information, and it asks you to look at your theory of change, and that often is used as a very off-putting thing. It's about that there's masses and masses of data on theory of change. I use about 3 lines for it in this, that it's really about saying what problem have we identified, what is it we are trying to do to solve that problem, and what does it look like if we have solved that problem. And once you've got that clear linear process, you then find it much, much easier to work out what it is you're trying to measure, because you're trying to measure how many people went from the first point to the last point because of what you did in the middle. And then section E starts to look at how you manage that information collection within your organisation. And there's a lovely interactive game that you can use on the site that you have to identify who it is in your organisation who's going to do this, who talks to the people, who does all the calculations, who puts a value on it, who writes the report, and make sure that you've thought about that all the way through. And then the last section, section E, is about systematic planning. And from that, you will pull together all of the information from the previous sections and look at how you, so you will have a systematic plan for managing your impact. So when you get the toolbox, you can decide where you start, but you can really start anywhere. So I'm going to go through to the introductory section on using the toolbox now, which I hope, can you now see how to use the social impact measurement toolbox? Great. Sorry about this. I'm very croaky this morning. So this section tells you how it works, and it's got a list of contents, and it describes how to use the sections. And I should say in each of those 6 sections, there's a description. There are some activities, some exercises you can do, and then there is an activity sheet attached to each section where you put in your information. You put in the things you find out, and what you buy when you buy the toolbox is a license for up to 5 people to be involved in your impact measurement group. And each one of you can access this site and fill in a separate sheet. And then there is a facilitator role who manages all of that and keeps the process going. We describe that all in here. And when you store everything on your activity sheet, it's effectively stored in the cloud. So you are in a private bit of our website. I mean, I have to say, you know, in terms of data protection, we could get access to this, but we don't, because it's yours and it's just for you to keep your information. So that's where you hold it, and you can go back to it at any time. So we suggest you start by reading the guidance, and it describes how to work on it and how the toolbox works. So these are the practical principles we've worked on. It's designed to be worked with a group of people. You can do it with one person, but the ideas are several heads better than one, and it's better if you've got different perspectives, preferably different people from different parts of the organisation or people who do different jobs. That's up to you. It is designed to save you time in the long run, even if it's difficult to invest your time in the short run. It's activity based, so you're always putting into practice what you do. We break it down into sections so you don't have to think about everything at once, because that's quite complicated if you're trying to put it into practice. You may need to go backwards and forwards through the section as you develop. That's fine, you can do that. This is an internal process, so it's important to be open and honest with yourselves. And you need to be proportionate about what you do. If you are only a small organisation, do not try and do a massive, detailed exercise. Start with something small that makes sense and will provide you more than you had before. And then gradually, as you get more confident, build up and take on, and you can look at more different issues you think you have impact over. Don't overclaim. Be confident that you could verify your results to a skeptical third party. That's what I meant earlier on about dodgy practice. There are some tools that people have picked up and used the bare bones of, but without using any of the details. So they'll say, for every £1 invested, we create £45 worth of social value. And I always look at that and say, really? Because people in the network of people who measure that stuff say, somebody said to my colleague, if they're claiming more than £5 worth of social value created, I think they're lying. Things can be really inflated. So people will just say, look at the outcomes, and they won't have costed in their inputs. And of course, it's cost you something to deliver this. But so it's important that you look at that and that you're realistic and grounded. And if somebody like me comes along and says, how did you reach that figure? You can say, like this. And it's about learning the right words as well, even if you don't start with it. So these are the sections I've just explained. Each section contains individual reading and thinking, short sections for you to read and think about and then discuss with your colleagues, some specific group discussions and some group activities. So these are some of the tools that we've got. We talk about working on the activity sheets that I've just explained. The facilitator role, you need to appoint one person whose role in the online workbook they have more a greater capacity to access everybody else's stuff, so that they can pull everything together and edit materials and keep things going. And then they can create a group copy, which is everybody's ideas in one place. So at the end of all of this, you will have a systematic plan for measuring your impact throughout your organisation, having involved your users and stakeholders, develop systems for collecting and analysing information to suit your needs. And it will be your own bespoke approach. There are a lot of named tools out there, so you'll be aware of them, things like Travelled, Outcome Starred, Social Investment, Social Audit and Accounting. If you then want to go on and use those tools to do some analysis of what you're doing, you will have the information in place. I've spoken to so many people who think they want to use those, but they don't have the basic information in one place that they can use, and it just becomes a massive task and too difficult to do. This is why the toolbox was designed to enable people to get to that place. So this is the this is where you decide where to start. So you can decide which of these sections look most appropriate for you. If you've never done anything before, start at the beginning. If you think you've done stuff, you can start. If you're just more interested in doing the theory of change first in section D, then you could do that, but it's entirely up to you. But we say, if you're finding it hard to answer questions in one of the later sections, maybe go back to the earlier sections and work through those first. So then we talk about the impact team and the facilitator, and the first meeting will probably be to agree your starting point. We suggest that you arrange meetings of no longer than 3 weeks, if possible, because otherwise, you know what it's like, you lose momentum, you forget what you were supposed to be doing, and so on. And then you go through to section A. So we'll link through to section A, so just so you can have a look at that. Can everybody see section A? Yes, I can only see Jane, so she's helpfully nodding. And then we see this is what's in the sections, this is what the activity sheet looks like, and what you'll have by the end. So pre-reading. When I said there are short reading sessions, that's how short they are. So it's really just asking you to think about some questions, a little bit of background information about how to think about these questions. And so this is one bit of reading. Then we ask you to do an exercise on your own. If I ask you, what happened in the last 6 months, which of these describes how your response would be? Have you got some information? Is it kept systematically? Is it kept on a computer or in a cupboard? Is it for one project, right, because your funder wants you to do it rather than everything you do? And then you do a bit of reading, and then you go on to the activity sheet. And then for this first section, we give you instructions on how to use your activity sheet. When you go to your activity sheet, it is a tiny bit funky because this turned out to be the most complicated bit of putting it online that we got to. So you get to the activity sheet, but actually you then need to move on to the edit. So you just hit the edit button. And then you get to the bit that you can write in. And then you save it. So you'll see that this has got my name on it. This is my version of it. We go down and the other group members then write their names next to their sheet, and then you work on your individual sheet. And you can save it. You can attach the file, save at the end. So that's how it works. All the sections are variations on that. There's an activity sheet for each one, and they're all slightly different. They all ask you to do different things. Some of them are more interactive than others, but they all need you to sort of think through things, understand how they work in your organisation, and to discuss with colleagues what that would look like for your organisation. So, okay, I'm just going to open the chat.
Yeah, we've had a question from Joe there, Nicky, that you'll see.
Yeah. Where can I find the right words to learn? I feel I need to know a whole vocabulary to use intended responses, but don't know where to look. Well, we do a bit of that in the toolbox to introduce that to you. There are a number of, there's one tool which does include impact measurement, but it is a wider thing, which is about community research. Is called RVAC. I'm going to just write the name because you. Now, what have I done?
While you're doing that, Nicky, I'll just answer the other question because I was about to say, people asking how much it costs. So normally it's £180, and that's this license for up to 5 people. But we're happy to send around a special code for attendees today, which will bring it down to £150. And we are Social Enterprises of England who sell this. We are a social enterprise, so the money goes right back into the sector.
RVAC, I can never remember what it stands for, but it's something Association for Voluntary and Community, something about association research and voluntary and community action. On their website, you will find a toolkit which helps you understand the basics of community research, and it includes a bit on impact measurement. I'm talking very authoritatively about this because I rewrote it and re-edited it a couple of years ago, so I know exactly what's in it. And it will give you some of the, it sort of introduces all the terminology and explains things in very, very straightforward language, and the idea, and so it helps you to learn the vocabulary to understand other tools. But quite a lot of them are written quite straightforwardly. If you look at something like the social return on investment model, which is the most complicated and the most technical, the introduction to the guide to it is actually really clearly written, and it does take you into complicated issues around attribution and dead weight and drop off, but it explains all of those. And that's quite a good source as well. Somebody's asked, is that £150 per year or for 5 users? It is a £150 as a one-off, or all 5 users are part of that license, and it's a one-off. We didn't want to have something that you have to sign up and repay every year. We wanted it to be something that you effectively buy and then you keep, and then your information is stored in for as long as you want to use it. Because of that information storage thing, it seems silly to have a cut-off where you couldn't get hold of that information anymore. So yes, it's a one-off payment. You get it. We'll notify you of any updates in the future, and that includes all 5 users. Are there any other questions?
Oh, yep.
Is this similar to Views? I'm not sure I know what Views is. Vanessa, would you like to explain what it is, what it does? I mean, if people want to put their cameras on now, I would be more than happy to see your faces. Find it a bit disconcerting looking at a blank screen. Is Vanessa there?
She might possibly be typing if she can't have her camera on. But I think it might be worthwhile mentioning, Nicky, obviously this has been designed so that people can just get going with it, isn't it? To demystify the subject and just start recording and talking about it in a team. But we can also offer consultancy if an organisation feel they want a bit of extra support, or maybe there's just one of them on their own. You're able to offer that, aren't you?
Yep. Yes. I mean, and that can either be a one-off just to get you going, to sort of talk through and explore how you would apply it in your organisation, or it could be sort of hand-holding throughout the process. So to do it, to have an intervention, to review each section as it goes through. So that's all on our website. Views, it says, we build views to help charities, non-profits and social enterprise companies organise and analyse data in a single platform. Sorry, Vanessa, I don't know it, but as we've established, there are an awful lot of tools around, but some of them are more techie. So it's just about saying, here's a technical platform to keep your information together on. Some of them are about, I mean, there's one I came across. It was a really good tool, but it involved all the users having the tech to sort of use an app to send in their information to the central site, which in some respects can be fantastic, really straightforward, and make life so much easier for everybody. But if you haven't got everybody at the end with a tablet or a phone that, you know, if you're running a day centre for the elderly, for example, and I know I'm broadly stereotyping, and I know my mum who's 90 does all her banking on the internet, but it's got to be appropriate for the kind of users you're using. So levels of technical access can sometimes be an issue, and you'd need to explore what you needed. There are some tools like, do people know about the Outcome Star? I know quite a lot of people are nodding. I can see a few people nodding there, and that is it's quite expensive actually. It does a very simple thing, which is to get people to, it gives different indicators of what might change for people, for different groups. There's loads of different ones for young people, older people, employment, health, housing, and so on. And they'll have these axes that you measure people on. So there's about 5 or 6 for each, and you get people to say how far they are along each one. And the idea is they have a little star shape comes out, and then the star gets bigger and bigger and bigger as their scores get higher and higher. And it's fantastic. It's really visual, and it's really helpful in terms of working with people on their individual outcomes. When I've used it, and I used it when I was evaluating a project that had already bought it, it was actually it seemed to me that what it hadn't done is do the next stage, which is enable you to produce that stuff in really fantastic reports. You ended up using snipping tools to put bits into reports. So it didn't do quite as much technically as I wanted to. I think quite a lot of us have tried to do things technically, but it just gets, as we can say from experience now, so expensive to try and do an all singing, all dancing version. So, I mean, if you can pilot something, Vanessa, and have a look at it and see what it works, usually you can get free access for a limited period. Just have a look at it and see if you think it'll work for you. That's the only thing I can recommend. Any other questions? Any sort of comments, thoughts? I know some of you, I think, are already doing quite a lot. What's your experience? What are you looking for?
Oh, Ali's raised her hand. Go ahead, Ali.
Hello. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and for me it's just like having that starting point, really, because it's a little bit overwhelming, and we're obviously trying to be able to evidence our social impact. We're a social care provider in Suffolk, and we're just I think everything you said, you're kind of like, yeah, oh yeah, and it all sort of makes sense. But then the order that it comes, and the fact that outcomes lead, you know, you take the individual outcomes, but then you have to put the value on them. And some of that stuff you were saying about how it's about the measurement of it, isn't it? And I think it's been really, really informative just to kind of give a steer of a kind of process or a method of how you might do that. And I think that was, before coming into this, that was where I was struggling, because we can collect bits of data, but how do you then, what does that mean? And how do you then, so I think the fact that you said, oh, it is a bit subjective, and that's kind of widely understood, that's helpful, because then it is a bit about, you then argue your case, don't you, and say, well, this is why we think this. And that creates a very personal story for an individual as well, because everyone would be different. So I found it really, really useful in that sense. So thank you very much.
Good. I'm glad. I mean, one of the issues is that, I mean, I think it's for some organisations, especially smaller organisations, is people say, well, where do we get the evidence of this from? We all know, if from our experience of talking to people, that if you do this, this happens, but we haven't got any hard evidence for it. And one of the things I always recommend you do is look for existing research. So if you find some research that someone else has done to make this case, then, and it's published research, it's from a university, you can often use that to say, well, this has been evidenced elsewhere, and we're basing our assumptions on this evidence, as well as our 20 years experience of working with these people. And don't undersell that either, because that is important. You've reminded me that somebody asked in the joining stuff about putting financial values on your outcomes. I think probably the best thing we can do is to circulate that afterwards. That's called giving something a proxy value. Again, I'm not recommending you use the social return on investment model, because it is complicated and it doesn't work. It doesn't work for every type of organisation. I mean, I'm an assessor, and so I know how it works. I've used it quite often, but I'm certainly not saying it's the answer to everybody's questions. It is complicated. And if you do it well, even if you only do it internally, it takes a lot of time and it works out as being quite expensive. But the introduction that I mentioned earlier, which is on the Social Value UK website, is really good if you want to go down this path and start to look at quantifying, putting a value on a monetary value. I would say, please use it with integrity and don't overclaim, as I mentioned earlier. And do use, there is a growing library. There are it's in different places, of course. If it was all in one place, it would be a different world. But there are libraries of people who have collected and calculated common data sets that you can put a value on. I mean, within the NHS, everything is valued. Every tablet, every bit of dressing for mopping a wound is valued. So you can go into the NICE, it's NICE, isn't it, website, and find individual values there. But there's some work that Manchester University have done. There's some work that HACT, the housing organisation, has done. Particularly, that's quite good on quality of life indicators, which is where we're putting out hard values to soft outcomes. And also there's some stuff on the Social Value UK website, which they've got some stuff. It can be quite frustrating because there's something you really specifically want to calculate, and then you can't find, nobody has actually calculated it in the right way. But I mean, just to share with you, I've actually just finished a piece of work in the Republic of Georgia, using the social impact measurement, social return on investment methodology, because that was what they wanted to use, although we didn't use it in its purest form. And we wanted, the program had funded 11 social projects in deepest rural Georgia, most of them. And sadly, I never got to go there because of COVID. It was really frustrating, but I worked with a very, very good local researcher. And it was really interesting trying to think about how you place a value on something, because all of the valuations that we've got are based on our costs in our country. And they had nothing calculated for their own local environment. What we did, and I'm sharing with you because I'm very pleased with thinking of this, because it did seem to work, was to work out the average wage in the UK and in Georgia, and then calculate what these quality of life indicators represented as a proportion of the average wage, and then use a calculation which valued those accordingly. And so that's what we did. But you couldn't be looking at savings for public services because there were no public services. There was a brilliant project where they had old people living in rural communities with no heating or hot water, got freezing in the winter. They didn't have access, they couldn't wash their clothes, they couldn't bath, they couldn't clean their houses. I mean, it just sounded awful. And they had this thing where somebody had, and I saw a picture of it, they had rigged up a washing machine in the back of a transit van, and this crew of people would go round to these people's houses and wash all their clothes in the washing machine. We're getting water from the local well, and while the others would clean the house and talk to the people and make them lunch and do all of this stuff. I mean, amazing. But you know, the quality of life impacts were massive, because you could tell in terms of attribution, no one else was doing anything. It was a really, really interesting project to work on. But anyway, I'll stop talking about that. So I'm just looking at the.
There's another question there.
Another question. Is that about the collecting funder information, but want to move towards the whole picture? Yeah, I think this is a real problem for organisations. You end up with one funder saying we want this, and another funder saying we want this, and you end up with systems that duplicate themselves. Ideally, I think you want to be looking at a map. Doing a big map on the wall and saying, what does this funder want? What does this funder want? And then mapping across, so that you can work out what information you can collect once in one format and then feed it back to several funders. There will be odd bits and pieces that will be peripheral to that. But of course, the other thing as well, you also need to say is, and this is also what we do, and this is what the people that we work with really value. So that's why it's important to be collecting that and send, even if the funder hasn't asked for it, send it anyway, because it will be saying, this is the value of what we do. So I think
Nicky, that's a good point. We're saying also, I mean, I'm a marketing person, and it's using this information to, like we've said, for the toolbox, of being confident in what you offer, what the benefit is. So if you've started the building blocks with the toolbox, and you've also answered some questions that the funders are looking for, you've instantly got control of your story, in effect, that you can use for a multitude of different things across the organisation.
Exactly. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left. Has anybody else got any other comments or questions? I will put together a little list of some of those sources of the proxy data that you can access, but as I say, use them with caution, and make sure that you're If someone else is also working with somebody, and if they come to you 2 days a week and go to another organisation 3 days a week, you should only be able to count 40% of the value of it. You can't count the whole thing. I mean, that's very crude, and it will vary from type of organisation to type of organisation, but you do need to be a bit cautious about it.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, so big thank you, Nicky, for that really good talk, and thank you everyone for coming along.